expired. We're working on abalone and pismo clams right now. If you're more interested in that, and I have had people come up asking me, especially if they live in the Orange County area or that Southern California area, and they may know somebody who's interested in helping us out, volunteering and so forth. We've got a couple hundred volunteers to help us out with that. Welcome aboard, Panorama. Everybody try to say that. A como mai. A como mai. We're going to learn a little bit of Hawaiian as this will be our fourth. I know, I'm thinking about all the languages I've taught you. This will be our fourth language. I'll do a better job with this one. All of the O's, ko, mo, if you see an O, as you know in English, sometimes we pronounce these letters when we learn in elementary school, short sounds, long sounds, so forth, with some of these letters, but luckily with the Hawaiian, all of the letters are always pronounced the same, which is cool, and that'll make it easy. If you don't, that's como mai. A, the E is pronounced as an A, always. And the O is an O, always. That means that would be pronounced a como mai. All right, we'll do a little more of that later. This is Hawaii. What we think of, it became a state in 1959, August 21st. It was 50th state. It was annexed in 1898. It became a territory in 1900, and then it took it another 59 years before it became a U.S. state. And we talked a little bit about that flag day before yesterday, and it's got this Union Jack. Does anybody remember how many stripes are on that flag? 8. If you were to count those, these would be the stripes. You count, there'd be 8. There's one stripe for every island, and then you've got that something that you would not expect to be on an American flag, don't you? You've got that Union Jack. And the Union Jack comes from which country? That's right, it comes from Great Britain or from England. You might be wondering, well, why is there a Union Jack on the Hawaiian flag? You certainly don't see the Union Jack on any other state, do you? But here in Hawaii, you do. And the reason for that, some of you may remember we talked just a little bit about this, is because George Vancouver, after Captain Cook, George Vancouver returned to the Hawaiian Islands in the early 1790s, and he met the king of the island at that time, who was King Kamehameha the Great, which we'll learn about today, and they had a special relationship, meaning that they had a close alliance, and King Kamehameha asked George Vancouver to go back to England and to ask the King of England if he would accept the Hawaiian Islands as a protectorate. And of course it took a while to travel back and forth, didn't it? Well, King George decided that no, we're not going to do that. But King Kamehameha still kept that relationship, and when he created the flag in the early 1800s, before his death, he incorporated the Union Jack into the flag, and it has just remained there for the last 150 years. And that is why there is a Union Jack on the Hawaiian flag. Hawaii is the only U.S. state comprised entirely of islands. It's the only U.S. state not located in the Americas. Alaska, of course, isn't part of the continuous 48. It's up north, but it's still part of North America, and the state does not observe daylight savings time. It's located about 2,300 miles from the nearest continent, making this group of islands the most isolated group of islands, and they're an archipelago in the world. And because of that isolation, we see some unique flora and also some unique wildlife here on those islands. Hawaii is actually closer to Alaska than it is to California. Interesting, huh? That's what it looks like from space. You can see the big island down there at the very bottom. You can see that other group of islands, and then you can see Kauai way off to the left there. And that's where we're headed. Anybody know how far away we are? About 2,000 miles. That's right. Here's another view of these islands. And I really like this. We'll talk more about this tomorrow when we talk about volcanoes. We've got the 8 islands that are down here that we're familiar with. Big island of Hawaii, and then it extends in this archipelago. But what you may not know is that archipelago extends even further. This entire chain of islands that the islands we're familiar with are a part of actually extend all the way to Midway Island. And there are over 140 islands that make up this. And most of those islands, we can't really see. They're underwater pinnacles, they're underwater seamounts, but they extend all the way up here to Midway Atoll, which we are almost directly south of right now. These are the islands we're familiar with. We've got the big island of Hawaii down here, and over here we've got Kauai and Niihau, which is another little island that sits right up there. And there are 2 other islands that you might not be as familiar with. Kaho'olawe sits right here, and Niihau sits right up here. And that would make a total of 10 islands, actually, in that group of islands. Here's what they look like again. Big Island, we are headed to Oahu, which is right here, kind of in the middle of all those islands. And I like to tell everybody that there are trade winds that persistently blow through these islands. At times they're stronger than other times. And the reason that's of interest, especially when we're visiting more than just one island, is because you're going to have a windy side, which we call a windward side, and you're going to have a leeward side. And that's of interest to us if we're going to the beach. If you're going to the beach, which side of the island do you want to be on? You want to be on what we call the leeward side of the island. And if we're looking at Oahu, this is where we're headed, there's Honolulu, and Honolulu is on the leeward side of the island. And that means you're not going to get sandblasted if you're lying out on the beach. You want to go to the leeward side of the island to enjoy those beaches rather than on the opposite side over here. And you can kind of see the orientation there. You've got the North Shore up there, and then you've got Pearl Harbor. How many people are headed to Pearl Harbor? Okay, if you haven't been there before, make sure you come to tomorrow's show, and I'm going to tell you about the ins and outs of getting to Pearl Harbor. All right, those are the trades. Here you get another map. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, and you'll get to see this map again. There's Waikiki. We're going to be landing at Aloha Tower. That's going to be our spot. That's going to be our landmark for us, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. A few roads to go inland. You've got a road that goes all the way around. How many people are renting cars, by the way, just so I get kind of an idea? Okay, good. Hawaiian Islands, birthed by fire. Talk a little more about that tomorrow. I want to give you just a brief overview of it. There is a hot spot that is in smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Now we talked about how these plates are moving. Our crust is broken up into plates. You can think of a hard-boiled egg. If you drop that hard-boiled egg, what happens to the shell? Cracks, right? And that shell now has cracks. Well, our crust has cracks too, and it's moving around. And normally where we see volcanic action is going to be around those boundaries, but this is an exception to the Hawaiian Islands. And it's like somebody poked a hole through the crust right smack dab in the middle of it. And as the plate moves over that little pinhole, that poke, every now and then an island is going to get poked up. And that's what's happened here with Hawaii. And you can see right now, every now and then, these little islands got produced by what we call this hot spot, as this plate is just drifting over and it pokes a hole through it, makes an island, and right now that hot spot is right over the big island of Hawaii. And there's a volcano there called Kilauea. And that volcano, every now and then, because it's over that hot spot, 2 or 3 times a year, maybe more, that volcano will erupt. And it's making that island grow. And that's the island right now that's growing. None of the other islands are growing. They are now dormant or extinct volcanoes where those are. Here's another little example of it. You can see that hotspot goes down about 60 miles, and it's pumping up every now and then. It'll bring up lava, and that island just continues to grow. And there's another little island growing there as well, and we'll talk about that day after tomorrow when we talk about volcanoes, and that's the little island of Loihi. Now there are a couple of, in Hawaiian lore, there are a couple of gods that the Hawaiians have named. One is Madame Pele. How many people have heard of her? Madame Pele, yeah, she's the god of fire. And she lives on the big island of Hawaii in the volcano, the Kilauea volcano. And then you have her sister, Namaka o Kahai, and she is the goddess of water. So you got the goddess of fire, Pele, and Namaka, who's the goddess of water. And these two are constantly in conflict with each other. Pele is considered the goddess of creation and the goddess of destruction as well. Namaka, the goddess of water, she is constantly eroding and breaking down what her sister, Madame Pele, is building. And there are many different stories about those two gods, but I thought you should know about them. Here is Pele and Namaka working together. Goddess, some of the beaches that Madame Pele creates are these black sand beaches. Sometimes they have this reddish color depending on the minerals that are being brought up. And then every now and then you get this cool thing. And this is a green sand beach. There's one in the state of Hawaii, and it's on the big island of Hawaii. There are 4 in total, and one of them, of those 4, is here in Hawaii. The other one's in Guam. Sorry, guys. But there are 2 others as well. Anyway, yes. All right. Many different microclimates because of the isolation of these islands. We get endemic species. There are thousands of endemic species, and the word endemic to scientists means that these are flora or fauna that are only found in this particular spot. 8 of the 13 microclimates found on our planet. Microclimates are things like tropical forests. They're things like tundra, boreal forests. Those kinds of descriptors are what we call microclimates, and there are 8 of the 13 that exist here. And the reason for that is because the Big Island, and also Maui as well, they have some pretty tall volcanoes. And on the Big Island, there are 2 volcanoes there, and each of those go up to 14,000 feet. That means that you can go from the ocean, a tropical forest, and in 2 hours you can drive up and be in an Arctic environment. And on the tops of these volcanoes, they get snow. There is snow in Hawaii. And the Hawaiians, the ancient Hawaiians, would go up there and they would bring snow back. And guess what the modern Hawaiians do? They do the same thing, except they do it a lot faster than they did back then. And they would bring back ice. And the top of that volcano, Mauna Kea, had glaciers during the Ice Age. And you can see glaciated rocks up there as well. And there are polished stone tools that the Hawaiians would bring back down from there as well. So it's very, very interesting. Endemic animals, we'll talk about a few of those. And then we have these rugged coastlines. And if you're at the newest island, which is the Big Island of Hawaii, it doesn't look anything like Kauai and some of those other islands because not enough time has passed by for erosion to take place. Once Madame Pele creates these islands and they begin moving on the plate, her sister Namaka is going to begin eroding those down, and you can see the amount of erosion that's going to take place to the Big Island of Hawaii just simply by looking at Kauai itself. And you can see those amazing cliffs and so forth. And we're going to get a chance to see those. Those are called pale. And we're going to get to see the pale when we go to Oahu. And if we have a nice clear day, we're going to pull into that port of Honolulu. You're going to look back at the backdrop and you're going to see those steep, steep cliffs. And Oahu has been being eroded for almost over a million years right now. Here are some of the endemic plants. There's a bird, a duck called, or a goose, I should say, called a nene. And this nene only found here in Hawaii. And if you're driving around doing some of these tours, you may get a chance to see one of these. They're related to the Canada goose. There's the hoary bat, only found here. And silver swords, we would see those if you're ever back here and you're going up higher in elevation through the up into some of the volcanoes on Maui and the Big Island, you'll get a chance to see those. If you go through a botanical garden here as well, if you're going to Waimea Bay, that botanical garden, you'll get to see these. There are dozens of species. They live at different elevations. They are only found here in the Hawaiian Islands. And guess what plant that is descended from? You'll never guess in a million years. A California sunflower. Never in a million years. How is that possible? It doesn't even look like it. There are many extinctions. 2%, Hawaii has 2% of the landmass, but it has over 70% of all the extinctions. 28% of endangered species in the United States are found right here in Hawaii. And the reason for that is because these islands are so isolated that these species, there's not a whole lot of genetic variation. One thing can touch them off. You could have some disease that would come in, it would wipe them out. And this is why, especially on the islands, we're so careful about what we bring in and what we take out, because one little thing, because they are so isolated, it just takes one little thing, like a Philippine rat snake, to wipe everything out, like it did on Guam. Took out every single bird species. And luckily here in Hawaii, we don't see that, and they're very, very careful. Everything that gets flown into this island, they look at, and they're looking for a snake, because if a snake gets on these islands, it's all over. There is no predator for these guys. How do things get on these islands? We're going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about volcanoes. But remember, when these land masses come up, there is nothing on them. And if you think about Hawaii, it's not close to anything. So when these islands came up, there was nothing around them. And now, as you go around, just think about that when we get to Hawaii and you're driving around Oahu, and imagine this place being completely bare of nothing. You have to ask, well, how did things get here? And the national parks teach us that the wind, the waves, the wings, and man are the way that life gets to these isolated land masses. And then there's a legend, some of you may have heard of this. When you're on the island, you don't want to take anything. And we're tempted to take like little souvenirs sometimes, pieces of lava. And here, Madame Pele will not be happy. And there's an old legend that if you take lava rocks from the islands, that will bring you back, that bad luck will follow you. Has anybody ever experienced that, by the way? No? Well, yes. So, and there was actually a sitcom way back in the day called The Brady Bunch. Does anybody remember that? There was one episode in that where they went to Hawaii, they came back and went back home, and they had taken one of them, I don't know who, somebody had taken a little piece of lava back with them. And it was taboo, yeah. It's kapu, they call it kapu. Tabu is Tahiti, yeah. And you'll see these letters, and the National Park has had these come back by the thousands. I dearly apologize for taking these off of native land. I wanted to return them to where they belong. Thank you. If you do, that's the address. Now, I have to preface this though. Lately, the last year or two, the national parks have asked us not to send things back to them, because they get all of these rocks that get sent back, and it's created like a whole new position in their staffing to be able to take care of all these rocks that are coming in. And then technically you have to put it back from where it came from. And a lot of times these come in They have no idea where these were picked up or taken from. But in any case, there we go. This is Kilauea. That was September 19th. It will erupt and then it'll stop. If you ever do come back to the Hawaiian Islands, definitely worth a stop. You never know when it's going to be erupting, of course. And you can check on the National Park website. You can check and see when these eruptions are taking place. Once again, talking just a little bit about where the Hawaiians came from. This is the Polynesian Triangle. We talked about this a couple of days ago. Once again, Hawaii makes the northernmost point of that. Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, is off to the east, and then New Zealand is off to the west. And we said the Tahitians arrived here about 1200 AD. Marquesans were here at about 300 AD. There were two waves of migration for the Hawaiians, both of them Polynesian. And for a long time, we didn't know how they got here. Now we do know. Was anybody at the show day before yesterday? Yep. How did they get here? They sailed with intention, and they navigated. The Polynesians, it turned out, were the greatest navigators of their time, maybe ever the greatest navigators. And they used the stars, the wind, the waves, they used birds to help them navigate, and then they passed all of that information down verbally from generation to generation. They had over 200 stars that they had memorized, and they knew where they were based on where those stars were rising and where those stars were setting. And we did solve that. They used voyaging canoes, double-hulled voyaging canoes. The one that was built, the Hokulea in our story, that was about 60 feet long, and they used those voyaging canoes to travel all through the Pacific Ocean. And how big is the Pacific Ocean? It's big enough to hold all the continents of the planet and still have room for another continent. That's how big this place is. It takes up a third of the surface area of our planet. And if you missed this story, I'm going to tell this story again on our way back from Hawaii. I've got one day where I'm going to tell that story again. They lived in splendid isolation after the last arrival of the Tahitians, and they were completely isolated. They didn't really travel. They lost that understanding of long-distance navigation. They traveled between those islands in Hawaii, those 8 islands that we know, and they lived in this splendid isolation until the arrival of Cook. And this changed everything for them. And Cook, on this voyage, had mastered his crosshairs, meaning he knew how to mark latitude, and he had figured out how to mark longitude, and he was a great map maker. Now Hawaii is in those crosshairs, and he arrives first in 1778. He arrives on the island of Kauai. He heads back up north. He's going to look for the Northwest Passage, and then he's got to figure out where he's going to spend the winter. North Pole doesn't look as appealing as the islands of Hawaii, and he comes back to Hawaii. During that time, King Kamehameha the Great is just a young person at this point. And he sees, when Cook comes back on that second voyage, he sees Cook with all of these cool things. The coolest thing being iron, and what the Europeans have done with that metal. They have created guns. They have created cannons, and you created nails for attaching pieces of wood together and things like that. And on those islands, because they're volcanic, there is no metal. This is the first time that the islanders have ever seen metal, this substance, and seen what they can do with it. Prior to that, and King Kamehameha is a teenager at this time when Cook comes in, and he sees all this. Prior to that, when he was a young boy, 7 or 8 years old, he had a vision that he was going to be the king that was going to unite all of the islands, but he didn't know how he was going to do it. And when Cook arrives, he sees these cannons and these guns and so forth, and he believes that that is part of his vision. And as it turns out, it was, and he is going to use those tools of warfare to conquer each one of these islands, the Big Island, and he's just going to go straight through the whole chain of islands. Kauai was the very, very last one. He didn't have to fight them on Kauai. but all the others he did. And when you see that pale, when you come into Honolulu and you look at that giant cliff there, that was where the final battle was fought. And it was fought not with a few hundred people, it was fought with thousands and thousands of warriors. It was a massive battle that took place there. He did unite the islands, and it turns out he was a pretty good leader, a pretty good king. We call the kings in Hawaii, we call them a li'i. And he was the li'i who united all the islands, the Napoleon of the Pacific, emphasized religious protocols. He had many heiau, and you may go on an excursion and you may see these heiau. These heiau were temples, or what the Hawaiians call their temples, or their places of worship. He increased foreign contact, as we can tell by the Union Jack sitting up there, still retained on their flags. And they became their first generation of wealth in terms of trade was with something called sandalwood. And this was something that the Europeans were carrying back and forth to China. And the chiefs on all of these islands, they were cutting down these forests of sandalwood. And sandalwood, until sandalwood was basically extinct on the islands. And then he established Honolulu as the seat of the government. He passed his lineage down. He died in 1819, and which really isn't that long ago when you think about it in terms of history. Certainly European history, also American to a certain degree. So by 1819, he had passed away, and he is going to pass this down, this lineage down through his sons. And it goes through, so this is going on all the way until the very last, and she was indirectly related to King Kamehameha. Her name was Queen Liliuokalani, and she was the very last monarch. She was deposed in 1893. And then there was a battle that took place. She was imprisoned, she was dethroned. There was a battle for the right of the monarchy, and eventually, she ended up being overthrown. A republic was established. There were 13 businessmen that actually orchestrated this. And for the most part, it was a bloodless coup. And they just took over this. And I'm going to explain how that all transpired just very briefly. But she was deposed 1898. It was recognized as a republic. And then 2 years later, the U.S. decided to annex it and make it a U.S. territory. And that was how Hawaii ended up under the umbrella of U.S. possession. Now you can visit her palace, and you can hear more. We don't have enough time to cover all the details of this story, but you can visit her palace while you're in Honolulu, and I'm going to show you where it is. You can literally walk to her palace from the ship. It's about a 15-20 minute walk, and you'll be right there at the palace, and I'll show you pictures of that tomorrow when we talk about Oahu, but it's quite a story. Now stepping back 80 years to the 1920s, this is Kamehameha dies in 1819. A year later, the missionaries arrived, and this is going to change Hawaii dramatically forever. And this is actually really the second greatest reason why we see Hawaii the way it is today. The missionaries arrived. They're coming from the ABC FM. Oh, and by the way, I should mention ABC stores. How many people have been to those? I often think, I've asked people, does the ABC for ABC stores comes from this? This is the American Board of Commissioners of Foreign Mission. American Board of Commissioners of Foreign Missions. I don't think it comes from here, but in any case, this is where the missionaries came from, and they are being sent out. This is an evangelical drive, this mission. There are Protestants, Methodists, evangelicals that are sending missionaries out during this early part of the 1800s, and they're going all throughout the world. They've had success in Tahiti, they've been in Tonga. Hawaiians end up, long story short, there are some Hawaiians that end up at the ministry headquarters on the East Coast, New England area, and they decide to bring missionaries out to convert all the Hawaiians. So they arrive, 1820s, they step off the boat right close to Kealakekua Bay, 184 missionaries, and they begin their missionary work. They say they came to do good, and they did really well. And the reason for that is because during this period, during the next few decades, they are going to become landowners. They are going to acquire land here and property. And when the mission decides that they're not going to fund the missionaries anymore, this was in the 1840s, they arrived in the 1820s, so it's about 30 years later they decide, okay, no more funding here. These missionaries and their children and their grandchildren, they decide to stay. They have become prominent individuals in the Hawaiian Islands, and they have to figure out a way to make a living. And how are they going to do it? They're going to continue doing this trade that is becoming more and more sophisticated because Cook put Hawaii on the crosshairs. You've got more of these European boats that are coming in. They discover sandalwood. They're discovering these products that they can begin doing commerce and trade with. And everything is changing, and it's changing dramatically because remember, just before the missionaries arrived, before Cook, there was no concept of property ownership. These islands were completely isolated from anyone before Cook, and that was in the late 1700s. So Hawaii changed really dramatically in a very, very short period of time. The first industry on the island is going to be the sugarcane industry. And this is where all of these people get brought in to help work in these sugarcane fields. And this is in the 1830s, I think it was around 1835, where the first land lease took place for sugarcane. And then you have this massive industry of agriculture, sugarcane production. Now, I'm not going to go over this in a lot of detail, but I just put this in, I just added this morning just to give you kind of a flow of what happened here and how dramatically it happened. So 1835, you've got the first sugarcane lease. Missionaries have only been there for 15 years, okay? And this is starting. They realize, okay, we can grow sugarcane here. Now you've got all of this European trade that is coming in, and these new ideas, these new concepts. King Kamehameha is gone. His son King Kamehameha II is coming in. These monarchs are very short-lived too, so it's going to go King Kamehameha II. These Europeans are coming in. King Kamehameha II takes a trip to Europe because this is a monarchy, this is a kingdom. And he's going to go to Europe, he's going to meet the king, the queen, except there's a problem with this as they're traveling out. And that is that they have no immunity to these European diseases. And both the King Kamehameha II and the queen, they're visiting the king, and what happens to them? They contract measles. They both die, they're put in a ship, they come back, the next king comes up, and this is happening. These monarchies between his sons that are coming into rule are very, very short. In the meantime, you've got all this trade and all of these Western ideas. One of the biggest, the most powerful Western idea was the idea of property ownership. And this is something that is completely foreign to the Hawaiians because they have never owned the property, never belonged to anybody, including the elite. The property was not something that you owned. Property was something that you managed, that you took care of. You were a caretaker. So even the king and queen, they weren't private landowners. They were the caretakers during their lifetime of these Hawaiian lands. So this is something that's really foreign to them. But Hawaii can't stay the same. It can't stay in the old ways of the 1700s because it's unstoppable. Because now they're a part of Western commerce and they've got to catch up with all of these ideas of commerce and land ownership. So in 1839, King Kamehameha III tries to create a Hawaiian Bill of Rights because they see this. the land is just being swept away, and so they're trying to push back a little bit to say, okay, let's take a look at this and figure out how we're going to do it. So he attempts to preserve these lands. Then you've got something called the Great Mahale, the Great Mahale. That's in 1848. And this is where they try to divide the land up a third, and a third here. The Maka Ainana, these are the commoners here. They try to give some of this land, preserving it for the commoners here, the crown lands, and then the Ali'i have their lands, a third, and then a third for the commoners. But the problem was, they said, okay, the commoners can get the land. They have 2 years to claim that land under title. Well, nobody knew how to read or write, and nobody knew what title to land meant. So the commoners just really didn't do anything for 2 years, and then that got picked up by other people who understood the legal system and so forth. And then the Kuleana Act of 1850. This was similar to the Homestead Act, and this is where if you were working property, you could go and claim. If you remember the Homestead, what the Homestead Act was in the 1800s in the U.S., this was the idea that you could go west and you could claim a parcel of land, 160 acres of land, right? And you could settle that. If you farmed it, settled it, then the government's going to give you that land through the homestead. That was going on in Alaska all the way through the 1960s, 1970s. Even you could homestead up in Alaska. So this was common practice for Westerners, but once again for the Hawaiians, not so much. And this Homestead Act, and they had to file a bunch of paperwork, but nobody really knew exactly how to do it because the concept of land ownership was still formed. So, and then the Tariff Act of 1890. So the reason I show you all of this is how the Hawaiians slowly lost grasp of their land and their heritage. And we talked a little bit about that when we did the Navigators talk as well. But this was all part of that process. So it wasn't like it was intentional, but it just sort of happened, and they gradually lost a lot of the control of their land. And this is what led to the insurrection that deposed Queen Liliuokalani in 1893. So this whole thing, they're losing the land. The land is going to people who know the law and how to handle that. And then Queen Liliuokalani comes into power, and she tries to step everything back. And when she does that, there are 13 business owners that are seeing this whole what has happened, because by now Hawaii looks so different, and it's become a really important source. So, for example, during the Civil War, Hawaii provided all of the sugar during the Civil War. This is where all the sugar came from. It's where Spreckels made his fortune during that period of time. So you got all of this in play, and these 13 business owners, they say, well, we can't step this back. It's too late. And if we do, we're going to lose everything. And they've been working and investing in all of this. And they decide that they're going to conduct a coup, and they're going to take that power away from the Queen. The president comes back. It was Grover Cleveland at the time. Queen Liliuokalani writes to the president. The president says, you're right. We can't take that land. That's not how we work here in America. And he goes back. Stanford Dole is the one leading that whole insurrection. And he writes a letter directly to him, and he says, you are to stand down and give this land back to the Queen. And Dole writes back to the president and says, no, I'm not going to do it. And he said, not only that, he said, you have no power over me because I declare us an independent republic. And because of that, Congress wasn't willing to act around that. McKinley comes into power after Cleveland, and that's right around the time of the Spanish-American War. And that's a period of time where America is actually stepping back as well and looking and going, wow, we've got some vulnerabilities here that we need to plug some holes, and Hawaii ended up being one of those holes that they plugged. And that's how Hawaii became a territory, and then 59 years later, became a state. All right, 50th state, August 21st, 1959. And Hawaii is our 50th state. Now, just a little thing about the Hawaiian language, because we're going to learn a few words in Hawaiian here. It was established by the missionaries, created by the missionaries, to write the Bible. Those are the consonants, and those are the vowels. How about that? Half of what we have to learn for the English language. That makes it easy. Hawaii is the only U.S. state to have two official languages, Hawaiian and English. And there's actually a third, it's called Pidgin. And you'll hear this a little bit when they're talking. It's a little bit of, they cut off some words, they don't use some verbs and things like that. When we get our Hawaiian ambassadors on, ask them to speak Pidgin, and they'll speak some Pidgin for you. And it's really fun to hear. 12 letters, those are the vowels, A, E, I, O, U, same vowels, and they just cut these consonants in half. English became the official language, the Hawaiian language died out. By the turn of the century, hardly anyone spoke Hawaiian. And now there are some Hawaiian immersion schools. There are schools where they're teaching Hawaiian, and then there are schools where they teach in Hawaiian as well. And when our Hawaiian ambassadors come on board, I'm not sure whether they've gone. One of them may have gone to one of these schools. All right, let's learn some words. What's this one?
Aloha.
Aloha. And aloha means what? Yeah, it means hello, goodbye, or love. These Hawaiians are going to come with a lot of aloha. So that's not hi or goodbye, but aloha just means this feeling of friendship, camaraderie, love, and all that. What's this one? Mahalo. And what does that mean?
Thank you.
That means thank you. Good, look at you guys. You already know these words. Malakini. First timer. Good job. Now, how do you pronounce that? Wiki. Wiki. Yeah, wiki. And that means quickly. How do you pronounce that? Wa, he, ne. Remember, the E is always pronounced as hey. Wahine. And what does that mean? Woman. Good. Does anybody want to take a picture of all those words?
Yeah.
You got it? Okay. How do you pronounce that? Kane. Right? The E is always pronounced A. Good. That means man. What about this? Kiki. Child. What about this? Ohana. And what does that mean? Family. We are all Ohana on this ship. Yes. What about this? Ono. That means delicious. Ono. And what about this? Appetizer. We usually, in English, we don't usually put those two words together. Ono pupu, unless you're walking the dog. How about this? This is your shaka. Just be careful which fingers you're holding up. That's your shaka, and you'll see people do that a lot, especially if you're driving. If you're in their way, it'll be a different hand signal. But if you're just driving, they'll do that. Adopted in by the surfers in the 60s. This is aloha wear. You'll have many opportunities. This is aloha wear as well. Here, and these shirts, dresses, and so forth. And they started in the 1930s. And it was this fellow right here, Shotaro Miyamoto, was the person who came up with this idea. Tourists were coming in the 1930s. He's got all these cloths. They're usually using them for draperies and things like that. And somebody said, can you make a shirt for me? And he did. Can you make a dress? He did. And the next thing you know, the rest is history. Elvis Presley, legislative resolution, 1962, it became the summer shirt. And if you've ever heard of, what do we call it, Casual Fridays? Something like that. This is where it came from. It came from Aloha Fridays. Many, many different flowers in Hawaii as well. Beautiful flowers. And you may not know this, but every single island has its flower. And you can see the one for Oahu right there. It is that little yellow flower, and of course, where Madame Pele lives, you would expect red, wouldn't you? That's the lehua. And I think I've got the state flower right there. You see that? That is the state flower of Hawaii. It's a yellow hibiscus. Now, if you do choose to wear a flower, and many people do, both men and women as well, for women, you need to make sure it's on the right side. And if it's on the left, that means that you are taken. And if it's on the right, that means you're available. So you want to make sure you get it correct. And if it's in the middle, it means you're desperate. That's not true. And then you have leis of Hawaii as well. The plant types of leis are more masculine. Flowers for the women, but men wear flowers as well. It's not uncommon. And tomorrow I'll be wearing a lei that the Hawaiians made for me. There are all kinds of different flowers. They can be fragrant, colorful as well. You can see this. They're used for celebrations, marriages, just get birthdays, just get-togethers. Really, really beautiful. It's a tradition here of Hawaii. Sometimes you'll see them like this. These are kukui nuts, and you can bring these back on the ship. I do know that. That's what the tree looks like. It's a candlenut tree over there to the right. The upper right-hand corner, you can see those nuts, and they come from the state tree of Hawaii. Oh, and let me just point that out at the bottom. And they can be different colors, different shapes, depending on how they grind them and how they prepare those. And they're really, really cool. I love them. This is, how do you pronounce this? No. So we're going to get this right now. It is u, ku, le. Ukulele. It's not ukulele. Ukulele. No. Uku. Yeah, now when we do our ukulele class and you go in, the Hawaiians are going to test you. Because everybody pronounces it on the west. Yeah, Westerns pronounce it ukulele, but it's not. It's ukulele. And the ukulele looks like that with people playing. It's a very, very common instrument. And when you think of Hawaii, you think of ukulele, right? As a musical instrument. But it didn't come from Hawaii, did it? Where did it come from? It came from Portugal. And how on earth is an instrument from Portugal going to end up on the islands of Hawaii? Pineapple, well, also pineapple and sugarcane. Because remember, they needed people to come in and use and make these, or work in these fields in agriculture. And you had people from China, Japan, Portugal, America, all over the world that came in. And when the Portuguese came in, they brought their instrument and it evolved into this ukulele. And there are different, there are higher ones, there are lower ones, all different kinds of ukulele. And then of course surfing. And we can thank Hawaii for introducing surfing to the world. And Duke Kahana Moku is the ambassador of surfing, and he became the ambassador for Hawaii as well. He was an Olympic medalist, and he introduced surfing to the world, surfboards and lifeguards as well. And wherever he would go, he would find a tree, and he would carve out a surfboard, and then when he would go to Australia, different places around the world, he would do that. He even ended up in LA, Newport Beach. And there was a storm that came in. He happened to be there on the beach. There was a ship that capsized. He grabbed his surfboard that he had carved, and he went out and he rescued the crew. I think there were 2 people that died in that, but he rescued the other 6, brought them back. And that is why if you ever see lifeguards and they have surfboards that are near their lifeguard stations, that's why they have it. Before that event and before the Duke, they never had surfboards, but they saw the value of it. And now they use surfboards. If you're down in Waikiki, you're going to see a statue like that. And that is a statue of the Duke, and you'll see that statue in a few other places. Anybody headed for a luau? Gotta try Kalua pig. And that Kalua pig is a Hawaiian, it's kind of like the hamburger is to America. We talked about this for each of these countries. Kalua pig is for the Hawaiians as well as poi. And how many people have tried poi? Most people who try it the first time, they don't really like it. But if you mix poi, it has a very bland taste, but if you mix it with some of the meat and so forth, you might decide that you like it. And poi is in the very lower part of that. Lau lau, these are taro leaf foods that are baked in taro leaves. Lomi salmon is also a Hawaiian type of salmon as well. And the hopia, that is their type of their pudding. And you may wonder, well, how can salmon be a local dish? Well, the reason for that is because King Kamehameha was good friends with Baranof, who was the governor of Alaska. And they were trying to cut some deals with trade as well, because Baranof's people up in Alaska were starving to death. Eventually they had to sell Alaska. So they started doing some trade, and they would bring salmon down here. During those days, they didn't have canneries, so the only way to ship salmon was in a great big barrel filled with salt. And if you try lomi salmon here, it'll still be salty. You'll be able to taste that salt. It became a traditional dish. Kalua style cooking uses an imu, and that imu is that open pit, and that's where they're going to bake that pig to make Kalua pig. You'll see some dancing here. These are Tahitian dancing, but you'll also get to see some of the local dancing here in Hawaii, which is called hula dancing. And our Hawaiian ambassadors are going to show you hula. It doesn't have hula is more of a graceful kind of flowing dance, and the Tahitian dancers that you're seeing here, that you'll see if you go to a luau, you'll see more of the hip movement. That's one of the differences there. More foods here. You've got Kona coffee, chocolate, beer, local beer brews. You've got the macadamia nuts that you're going to want to try. I'm going to just mention this Kona coffee. If you do buy Kona coffee, make sure you buy, it has to say 100% Kona. If it says just Kona coffee, that means it's got 10% Kona coffee beans, and the other can come from anywhere else. So it has to say 100% Kona, and then if that's what you want, and then you're getting that Kona coffee here. And then of course this Spam, I strongly encourage you to try this. 7 million cans per year. There are many different kinds of Spam. You can find it at some of the fast food restaurants as well, Burger King.